Welcome to the Fearless Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominique. In a recent episode, I spoke with Hussein Mansour on the radicalization of university college students through the proliferation of critical theory and other neo Marxist schools of thought taught in the classroom, as well as the normalization of liberal norms and ideas. This has created a generation of social justice activists who advocate for a myriad of causes, including the Free Palestine movement, which has become salient since the October 7 massacre, as many university students have called for the divestment of their universities in supporting Israel and for the state of Palestine. With this has come anti Jewish, anti Israel rhetoric, which has endangered many Jewish students and many pro Israel students across American universities. At the core of the Free Palestine movement on university campuses is the important role of Students for Justice in Palestine. They have a national office, but there are chapters at almost every university in the United States. They help organize these pro Palestinian protests, sit ins, riots, and even the encampments seen across university campuses in the spring of 2024. Colombia University was the first that set off a chain reaction across many prestigious universities for Palestinian college encampments. Today, I speak with Daniel Suhr to discuss his class action lawsuit against Colombia's Students for Justice in Palestine chapter, the SJP national office, as well as other important actors such as faculty and even Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and a few other members of Congress who encouraged the illegal encampment on Colombia's campus. These protests and riots not only prevented Colombia from delivering essential services that every student on Colombia pays for, but it also helped facilitate an environment of harassment and discrimination against Jewish students. Today, when we discuss this lawsuit, it's important to keep in mind that these are the legal implications of the radical ideologies taught at American universities. And it's an important conversation to have as we seek both justice and retribution for discrimination against Jewish college age students, but also an act to deter future violence across American universities. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Daniel Suhr, welcome to the Fearless Project podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me, Dominique. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Maybe you could give the audience a bit of background on your career professionally. What have you been focusing on? I know that you're also a lawyer and you work in the ethics and kind of religious freedom space and education.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And really, it's a joy. This reason we're on today is to talk about one particular case dealing with the rights of students. But every day, I get to go into courtrooms across America and represent students and parents in their quest for, I think, what we would call educational freedom. That all of us as Americans deserve quality schools. I believe we deserve options among schools. I think that's true both in K-12 and in higher education, and that whatever educational institution we settle on, our students should have their rights respected and protected. Students are important, active members of our community. They obviously, as we're going to talk about today, have strong opinions about the world, and they deserve to have safe, supportive educational environments that allow them to test out their ideas, share their opinions, and exercise, I think, the same free speech that we hope that one important part of being in school is learning to be a good citizen. That's one of the things schools should be teaching is citizenship, and that includes the space to exercise your rights as a citizen and to see and respond to others as they exercise their rights. So those are all important principles that I think really stem from our Constitution. And as I say, it's a joy for me as a lawyer to represent students and families to make sure those rights are respected and protected.
That's amazing. I couldn't agree more. And you're representing a case that is very important, especially kind of in this cultural moment. Since October 7th, the issue of Israel and Palestine has been very contentious, and no more than on college campuses. We've seen riots, protests, sit-ins, Colombia specifically, which I know pertains to the case that you're representing, in the class action lawsuit. So, what is that class action lawsuit? Who are the defendants, and who are the plaintiffs?
Yeah, so I represent five Jewish students at Columbia University who were victims of the unrest last semester. That if we all take our minds back a little bit to the spring of 2023, you'll remember, or spring of 2024, sorry, you'll remember the chaos on campus, right? And it was true at multiple universities, but nowhere in America, probably more so than Columbia, where we had an encampment that really shut the school down for a 2 week period and ultimately led to the takeover of Hamilton Hall in a very violent riot, frankly, taking over a school building, battening down the hatches to try to fortify the building against police, and a response by the NYPD riot squad. So it got ugly, it got real on Columbia's campus. And the unfortunate reality is that for everybody else at Columbia, their spring semester was ruined by the radical agitation and activism of a couple of their classmates. So my clients, for instance, they paid tuition to go to class every day. They paid for a special fee to access the gym. They paid money to put in their account for the cafeteria. Well, none of that does any good if campus is closed, the cafeteria is closed, the gym is closed, classes are closed, right? There are all these things that they paid for that Columbia was ready to offer them, but was unable to do so because of the extreme uh, lack of safety, the extreme discomfort and agitation, and to the point of the violent outburst of their classmates. And so those students were denied what they paid for, and so we're suing Students for Justice in Palestine, the on-campus agitators, the off-campus enablers, the faculty enablers of all of that encampment activity to say, hey, you guys broke the law. You broke the school rules. You were engaged in illegal trespassing. You took over and destroyed a school building. Like, you broke the law. That law breaking affected not only Columbia, but all 36 students at Columbia as well. 36,000 students at Columbia as well. It cost them money. It damaged them. And so now you need to make them whole. You need to compensate those students, all the other students at Columbia, for the damage that your illegal behavior caused. That's the whole basis for the lawsuit.
And that dollar amount, I know that it's over $30 million. Could you kind of take the audience through how you arrived to that? What were some of do you know the tuition cost annually to attend Columbia, or what the ballpark?
Yeah, it's about $60,000, right? It's not a small number for what you pay to go to Columbia, which is appropriate to the fact that Columbia is a world-class institution, right? It's one of the most expensive because it's one of the best, and these students and their parents are spending money, significant money, to be in the classroom, with world-class professors, to be in the classroom with the best and brightest classmates, to have those discussions, to build their personal networks, to set up for professional success, to have mentors, right? That's what they're paying for. And when students can't access campus for 2 weeks, when classes are canceled, when study groups are canceled, when office hours are canceled, they're not getting what they're paying for, right? They're being denied the education that they have paid for. And you can put a dollar value on that. You can figure out, if you divide that tuition by the total number of school days and then look at number of school days that weren't offered, like, there's a dollar value that you can calculate. And then you can multiply that by the 30,000 plus students at Columbia who didn't get what they paid for, right? That's why we call it a class action in the law. The idea that not just these five plaintiffs that I represent initially, but hopefully every student at Columbia was equally injured and equally deserves compensation, and that the court can certify a class of all students at Columbia to make sure that everybody gets compensated for the damage that was caused. I'll just add quickly, Dominique, the other particular damage was that for the graduating class of 2024, their graduation was canceled. Their all university commencement, the big highlight moment didn't happen. And these poor kids didn't get their high school graduation because of COVID. And now, because of the radical and illegal behavior of a couple of their classmates, creating such an unsafe environment that Columbia had to cancel their all university commencement. But how do you put a dollar value on that when you think about parents and grandparents coming to commencement? When you think about, the lifetime highlight moments that we all share and experience, our wedding day, the birth of our child, our college graduation. Like when one of those top 3, 4 moments in life is stripped away from you because somebody else chose to be abusive, aggressive, and engage in illegal behavior, like how do you put a dollar value on that? Well, we're going to ask a jury to put a dollar value on that, but I think it's going to be a big dollar value. I think all those students in the graduating class, deserve to be compensated by the people who broke the law and created the unsafe environment that forced the cancellation of commencement.
I agree. And I was the COVID college graduating class of 2020. And I can speak to, I mean, that was also a global pandemic. It was unknown. It was confusing. So, it wasn't even directly linked to someone's actions, which there's almost even a more personal elements to that. These were their fellow classmates who chose to strip that from them. But it is it's an emotional thing to go through college for 4 years and to study for exams. And Columbia is an Ivy League. So these students went through a really rigorous course schedule. And then to have that taken away, there is an emotional kind of cost to that I think is hard to even put a dollar amount on. But there wasn't just, these students didn't get what they paid for. There was also discrimination against many of these Jewish students. Could you speak to some of the experiences that they had on campus?
Yeah, it's such a sadness what so many at Columbia experienced. So the first thing I want to make clear is every student at Columbia, Jewish or non-Jewish, was impacted by what happened. I think one of the things we sometimes lose sight of on these campus protests is that the media creates this narrative that it's the Jewish students versus the Arab students on campus and sets up this like battle. But the reality is that 36,000 students at Columbia missed out on their classes. Whether they support Israel, support Palestine, doesn't matter, right? The classes got canceled regardless. But obviously, for students who are Jewish, the encampment affects them in a particular way because of the harassment that was directed at Jewish students. We know from all the publicly available news reporting just the incredibly vicious, ugly signs and slogans that were hurled at Jewish students. We know that Jewish students were shoved, kicked, spat upon by people inside the encampment. We know that Jewish students were denied access to the campus quad, right? I mean, this was the main quad outside the main building on Columbia's campus, and most of the time, students can go there and play frisbee, right, or throw a football around with friends. And in this instance, if you were Jewish, this was a no-go zone. To the point where, for my clients, one tells the story of having to start a text messaging group with a couple of his other Jewish friends, male and female, to make sure that no one walked alone. That if you're going to go walking through campus, the campus you paid tuition to be on, the campus that you paid tuition to live in the dorms at, that you could walk safely because there were a group of you walking together, even in broad daylight. Because if you were vulnerable to being singled out as Jewish, especially knowing that Jewish students so often wear a physical manifestation of their faith that's visible, something like the skull cap, then you would get picked on, harassed, bullied. You'd be subject to hate speech, and that is obviously unfortunate. And it's one of the things that we're trying to rectify, is to say that for those Jewish students who were victims of, incredible emotional distress and displacement, that they deserve to be compensated for having to experience that level of hate from their classmates.
Mm. And maybe, some people in the audience might say, well, the student protesters or activists were exercising their freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. constitutionally, what acts of activism are protected, and then to what extent does that then infringe on another person's constitutional right to also, assemble or to hold different political views? I think because this issue is so inherently political, but then also there's religious undertones, defining kind of what the constitutional rights protect versus what they infringe upon has been really difficult.
It is difficult. Those are big, deep questions. I actually don't think Colombia is the right context to ask them, though. And the simple answer is Colombia is a private institution of higher education. And so the First Amendment doesn't apply in the same way that it would down the street at State University of New York or City University of New York. That when you go to a public institution of education, you have the same First Amendment rights you'd have in other settings. Maybe they look a little bit different in school, but the First Amendment still protects, the students who wear the kind of famous case is called Tinker versus Des Moines School District, and it was students who wore black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. So that's always been true in public schools. Columbia is not a public school. Columbia is a private university. And so the only rights that students have to use campus facilities, to hold an event, are the rights that Columbia chooses to give them. And in this instance, Columbia has rules. And those rules are pretty clear. They're pretty straightforward. If you want to be a student organization, if you want to be a student, and you want to hold a rally or an event, you go get a permit from the dean's office, right? And that permit says from 1 to 3 p.m., you can hold your rally in this space and nobody's going to bother you, right? Frankly, that's exactly what happens even in the public square setting, that the First Amendment is subject to what we call reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. Sure, you can have a rally, but the police are perfectly within their rights to say, you need to hold that rally in a public park. And you can only hold the rally between the hours of 9 and 5 p.m. And you can only use a bullhorn between 9 and 5. Because after 5 o'clock, people around the park who have homes want to go to sleep. And if you're having a bullhorn at 3 in the morning, they can't, right? And so the First Amendment is not absolute. It's subject to reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. Columbia has in place reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions for student groups to hold events. In this instance, Columbia Students for Justice in Palestine was suspended as a student group in the first place because they held an event with what we believe from publicly available reporting to be terrorist organizations, like people affiliated with terrorist groups from the Middle East. And so Columbia suspended them as a student group. They went ahead and had the event anyway. And then obviously they put up tents. They didn't leave, right? That Columbia said, if you want to have rallies as student groups, that's fine. Get a permit. Do it within these set hours. And instead what they did is they chose to break the rules. And I think it's important to underline that. They chose to break the rules. And breaking the rules was a key part of their strategy. If they had just held a rally on the school mall from 1 to 3 p.m., no one would have cared. The news media would not have reported it. They would have held their rally and they would have posted a few pictures on social media and they would have gone home and the world would have moved on. It was only when they started to break the rules. It was only when the university had to call the cops. It was only when they transgressed those lines that the media started to pay attention. Breaking the rules was part of the point. And unfortunately, one of the realities of our media environment is that it's only when you engage in these acts of so-called civil disobedience that you can get the sort of media engagement you're looking for. And so breaking the rules, causing an unsafe environment, going to the extremes was the point, right? That was how they got leverage on the university to advance their goals. That's how they got the media attention they wanted to share their message. And so it was always about disobeying the rules, disrespecting the First Amendment, and trying to wrap themselves in that rhetoric, when in reality they were blowing way past anything that the law protects or allows. They're engaging in illegal trespassing. They knew it and they wanted to. When they took the building over, Hamilton Hall, and turned it into Heinz Hall, that was all the point, was to escalate, create a more unsafe environment, create more turmoil, create more chaos in order to generate more media coverage. That was always the point.
And I noticed that in your class action lawsuit, Colombia is not being held responsible. It is the Students for Justice in Palestine. What was the reasoning behind that? Because from an outside perspective, it kind of looks like Colombia really capitulated to the Students for Justice in Palestine kind of organization, or even movement is what I would really call it, across its campus.
Yeah, that's a great question. And Colombia needs to be very aware of its independent legal exposure here. So, first of all, Colombia, as a university that receives federal funds, has obligations under federal law. Title VI of federal law protects all students in federally funded schools from discrimination based on race and religion, which has always been interpreted to include anti Semitic behavior. That universities have a responsibility to ensure their students have a safe and supportive environment, and that includes an environment free from anti Semitic behavior, including by other students. And so there are actually several lawsuits at other universities right now. There's an important lawsuit at UCLA, there's an important lawsuit at Harvard, where Jewish students, are demanding that the university protect them from the anti Semitic behavior of their classmates and their professors to some extent. There's a similar lawsuit already against Colombia that was filed even before the campus protests on behalf of Jewish students at Columbia who felt like Columbia was failing in its responsibility to protect them under federal law. So I think that legal exposure for Colombia is very real, and I think you're absolutely right, Dominique, to point to Colombia's failure to respond effectively to what happened here. But that doesn't mean we should excuse the people who caused the problem in the first place. Like, yes, Columbia has a responsibility to safeguard its students and its campus, but we also need to hold accountable the people who caused the problem in the first place. And so, for me, that starts with these students who broke the rules, who knew they were breaking the rules. It starts with the faculty who coached them on how to break the rules, who supported and encouraged them as they were breaking the rules. You may remember the pictures of faculty like ringing the encampment, wearing their green vests in order to prevent public safety from clearing out the encampment. And it extends to the off campus agitators and endorsers who were training these students, funding these students, supporting these students, coming onto campus and encouraging them to continue with their illegal behavior. Like, all of those people also need to be held responsible for what they did, the damage they caused, and hopefully deterred from doing it again. That part of the point of our lawsuit is to say not only that you must compensate these students for what you have done, but also by making them compensate the students, it deters them and others from engaging in similar behavior in the future.
Mm. And you've mentioned all these different, actors who either helped facilitate, train, equip them, even, ideologically with the rhetoric. I would argue that a lot of these faculty members who were defending these students have been indoctrinating them for decades and decades. So it's really no surprise that they would play a big role in this. But Students for Justice in Palestine, for those who are watching who might say, oh, well, they're just, a small student organization. It seems unfair to place such great blame on them. They're young. They might even be naive or stupid to like the legal repercussions of it. What's your sense of how well organized it was? I know that there's even, kind of speculation that foreign entities, including Iran, were big funders even behind this and the organizing of it. So how deep do you think both the funding and the organization went beyond just these students on the campus?
So the short answer is we're going to find out. One of the realities of a lawsuit is that you get to engage in what's called discovery, that you get to ask the other side for documents, emails, text messages, bank records, other financial and organizational information to be able to discern, who funded this, who paid for it, And who's going to pay the verdict? Who's going to pay the compensation to all of these other students who are damaged by it? So those are all very real questions that we're going to be asking over the course of this case, and that I think deserve to be answered, that the truth needs to come out as to who was behind this. But what we can say right now, simply based on publicly available news reporting, is that this was a coordinated, multi-month planned, intentional undertaking that really, from October 8th, right, immediately following the events in Israel, National Students for Justice in Palestine was actively engaged in coordinating its chapters across the country, coaching its students on how to respond, and that obviously this was not organic, right? This was not just limited to one school. This was not just one group of kids who decided to act up in a particular way and have an encampment, right? This was a strategy that was coordinated across the country. And these students in particular at Columbia, we know were coached by off-campus radical activists who are experienced in creating unsafe environments, who are experienced in protest and riot tactics, and that for months this was planned out ahead of time. And Columbia, I think, was probably, a combination of being in New York, being in the national news media hub, having the global reputation that it has as a school, sort of became the poster child for what was clearly a coordinated national strategy.
Hmm. And is your class action lawsuit going after just the Colombia chapter for Students in Justice in Palestine, or is it Students in Justice in Palestine? I don't know if there's an overall entity, or is this just kind of an
There
independent?
is. No, there's a National Students for Justice in Palestine organization. We've sued them as well because they were actively co-sponsoring, participating in, supporting, training, encouraging, co-hosting events and social media streams from within the encampment. So they were clearly intertwined throughout this entire process and project. And so I think part of what just happened practically was that as Colombia became ground zero for this fight nationally, that National Students for Justice in Palestine, really leaned in. And because they played such an important role in facilitating and supporting this, they need to be equally responsible for what happened. That's why they're one of the defendants in the case.
And then I know that one of the other kind of defendants listed in the press release that I read a while ago were, I guess, the Quad or the AOC, Ilhan Omar, and Jamaal Bowman. Are they still included in this class action lawsuit, and why were they included initially?
Yeah, absolutely they are. So members of Congress, get free speech like everybody else, and they can say what they want when they are on the floor of Congress about public policy issues. But what they can't do is break the law like everybody else, right? Members of Congress are not above the law. And in this instance, uh, we only named those three particular members. Plenty of members were, publicly speaking out about Gaza and Palestine and Israel and the campus protests. Like lots of members of Congress or senators were engaged. But these three particular members all went to the campus, illegally trespassed onto the campus. At the time, campus was closed to all non Columbia University ID holders. And so they got smuggled onto campus using somebody else's ID. And then they walked around the encampment supporting it, encouraging students to continue to engage in illegal behavior. And so, we have a term for that in the law. It's incitement, right? If somebody gets up and encourages people to break the law, and then people, do break the law, like the person who encourages the law breaking is also responsible for the law breaking. And that's what I believe happened here. I believe these three members of Congress were walking around the encampment, encouraging these students to continue breaking the law. And so they need to be held responsible. You, Dominique, earlier pointed out these are students. They are ready to be influenced. And so, sometimes maybe that's faculty, but when you have, members of Congress who are rock stars within your community showing up and giving moral support to your cause, encouraging you to continue with something, like that resonates in a deep and important way for these students. And so, the members need to be aware of the fact and responsible for encouraging people to break the law.
And what would you say to someone who said, again, these members of Congress are just exercising their right to free speech? They hold a policy position. Where is it because they entered the campus under disguise of another student and entered illegally? Is that kind of where this class action lawsuit is trying to kind of drive their liability in this?
Yeah, that is the key distinction. That plenty of members of Congress speak out on Israel-Palestine issues. Plenty of members of Congress even speak out on campus protests, right? And these campus protests, they take to Twitter, they go to the floor and give a speech. That's all, of course, protected. But these three members of Congress in particular went to the campus, illegally trespassed onto the campus, and then walked around the encampment personally encouraging these students to continue breaking the law, right? It wasn't like they were just offering a commentary like, oh, Israel and Palestine, this is so interesting, or oh, I really believe we should be giving fewer arms shipments to Israel, right? That wasn't it at all. It was, keep it up, guys. You're doing great. I'm so proud of you. This is such an amazing experience for all of you as students, and keep going. We've got your back, right? It was rhetoric not about the policy issues. It was encouraging these students to continue breaking the law. And that's the point at which, you're aiding and abetting, you're conspiring with, you are offering that moral support, that incitement to break the law, and you become responsible.
And to your point as well, like these are students, not that their ignorance, absolves them of their moral responsibility and just breaking the law in general, but when you have, three members of Congress coming and legitimizing in their eyes their actions and encouraging it, there's a sense too that, oh, like if they, create the law, if they create legislation, then we must not be, breaking the law. I think it kind of adds to the idea that, they were justified in their sit-ins, in their encampments. So I feel like they should really be held liable for. I don't even know if I'm using all these legal terms. I'm like, I don't know if I'm using them correctly, but they should be held to responsibility for it, because I do think it's just such an abuse of their position in the U.S. government. Um, I do also want to ask, I don't even know if it pertains to this case particularly, but what is the line between being, a college activist and then domestic terrorism? So their tactics, their actions, I think were harassment at the very least. But when you chant, slogans for or that are echoed in Hamas's charter, such as, death to America, death to the Jews, Iran often will say this. When you are kind of peddling or using the same rhetoric as a terrorist organization, what's the fine line between being a college activist and then domestic terrorism? Or could they be designated as domestic terrorist, or is there some protection under the law because they're not, officially part of the organization, that they wouldn't be defined as such?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's frankly a very hard line it's obviously a hard line to draw. It's also, I think, a difficult line that cuts across our ideological preferences. So, Hillary Clinton had a interview on MSNBC the other day where she was talking about Russian propaganda. And she was saying that if Americans repeat Russian election interference propaganda, that they should be potentially liable for repeating Russian, misinformation, so called. So this is one of those issues where our our First Amendment rights are broad. Frankly, the First Amendment protects hate speech. I know there's that Tim Walz clip floating around from MSNBC a few years ago where he says, the First Amendment doesn't protect hate speech or misinformation. Uh, that in and of itself was misinformation. Like the First Amendment, the Supreme Court has said, protects both some level of hate speech and um, some level of lying. But all that said, I think you're very right, Dominique, to point us to the terrorism statutes, which are on the books and which define, material support of terrorism as a crime or as as a civil offense. And just a few years ago, the Supreme Court had a case dealing not with the Middle East, but with another set of nationalist activist groups who were trying to support their nationalist activists in their homeland that have been designated as terrorists. And the Supreme Court upheld the statute and said, you um, giving them training, giving them information, advocacy, when that becomes material support, it's not protected by the First Amendment. And so there's actually a lawsuit already, not by me, but by another set of lawyers in Virginia against American Muslims for Palestine and National Students for Justice in Palestine on behalf of uh, the families of some victims of October 7th, some of the people who lost their lives in the attacks of October 7th, their families, uh, alleging that American Muslims for Palestine and National Students for Justice in Palestine are breaking these anti-terrorism laws that we've had on the books, as it is already once in history, a number of more than once perhaps in recent history, a number of charities, so-called, have been shut down um, in the wake of lawsuits, litigations, and investigation for providing material support to terrorism. And I think that Virginia case is going to be really interesting to watch to see if uh, those current organizations are crossing those legal lines.
And is there any sense in your class action lawsuit specifically that there was foreign interference or ties to Hamas or terrorism in the Middle East, or will that come out more in the discovery phase that you had mentioned?
I'm sure we'll learn lots more about lots of things in Discovery. The one fact that I do know for certain is that in the start of the spring semester, the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter at Columbia hosted a event in a dorm room after the university twice declined to grant them permission to host it in another university space, and that the speakers via Zoom for that event included one speaker who was affiliated with uh, PLPF, People for the Popular Liberation of Palestine, which is a designated U.S. designated terrorist organization. And then another speaker from a group, something like the Palestinian Prisoners Network, uh, was part of a terrorist organization designated by the government of Germany. And so we know, at least from that event, that two people affiliated with um, foreign terrorist designated organizations were actively, I think, radicalizing these students and preparing them to break the law as their contribution to the overall cause.
This question I'm going to ask is it's such a slippery slope, but what role would faculty have in radicalizing students? I know that not all faculty or might not be an official position for certain universities, but certainly some, and I've even had some in my higher education who would, preach from their pulpits in the classroom, very anti-America ideologies, and if not overtly, kind of priming these young generations to be sympathetic towards radical terrorism or even Islamism. And I know that obviously there's free speech, and censorship is obviously not something that I would ever endorse. But is there a fine line between holding faculty also accountable for this, or is that much more difficult to prove?
No, it's an excellent question, Dominique, and I do think it's important that faculty are held accountable for what they do with their students. So that starts with students demanding an actual education from their faculty, right? Students pay tuition; they pay a lot of tuition, as we've been pointing out, and they deserve a good education. And when faculty fail in that, when they abuse their position to deliver propaganda, right? Indoctrination rather than education. Students should uh, complain. They should, point out when that happens. I think legally, though, there are several lines that were potentially crossed here. One, there have been two extensive reports now from Colombia's own anti-Semitism task force about anti-Semitism on campus, including anti-Semitism among the faculty. And those reports, I think, really contribute to this question of whether Colombia is following its Title VI obligations, that creating a safe and supportive environment free from anti-Semitism is not just anti-Semitic speech by students, it's also anti-Semitic speech by faculty. That when faculty members engage in just blatant uh, uh, wrongful, sometimes hateful speech, um, that fails that the university is subsidizing by paying their salaries, by putting them in these positions of power and influence, that fails the university's obligations under Title VI. So that's the first major point of faculty accountability. And then the second, in our lawsuit, the defendants include one individual faculty member, it includes two faculty unions, and it includes one faculty organization. That these faculty groups were coordinating faculty members to come to the encampment, to join in the encampment, to hold rallies with the students in the encampment, to encourage the students to continue with the encampment, to, again, incite the students to press forward with their illegal behavior, to organize graduate students to participate alongside, to protect the encampment from public safety or the dean of student staff, or even the NYPD when they were going to enforce the rules. And like all of that is just as illegal, right? That when these faculty members, academic freedom maybe covers what you, not maybe, academic freedom covers what you say in the classroom. Academic freedom covers what you publish in your research articles or your dissertation. Academic freedom is not showing up at an illegal encampment, encouraging the students to persist in their illegal behavior, and protecting the students with your body from the police enforcing the law. That is not academic freedom. And even if it is academic freedom, it's still illegal in a very practical way in civil court. And that's the point we're going to prove in our lawsuit.
Yeah, and that's another example of authority legitimizing what they're doing in an unofficial capacity. But there was also, I think, back in July, and I'm sure there's many cases of this, but there was some text messages released from Columbia administrators who essentially were calling, Jewish students who were complaining about just the hostilities on college campuses. They accused the Jewish students of coming from a place of privilege and dismissed their concerns. And that was just one example. They actually published the text conversation between the, I guess, two faculty members. But that's just one, kind of example of even this maybe institutionalized within Columbia, maybe unofficially, but just through the prevalence of anti-Semitism in their faculty, which then trickles down to the overall culture of the university. Daniel, if we're following, anyone in the audience following this class action lawsuit, what is the next step and what does that timeline look like? I'm sure these can take years, but if we want to follow along on this case, where should we follow? Is there any official website or news source that we can do that on?
Yeah, the easiest thing is just follow me on Twitter. It's at Daniel Suhr, Suhr, on X on Twitter. But I post frequently about what's happening in this case and other similar cases. So if you're interested in kind of the legal component of the fight against anti-Semitism on campus, and in particular this case at Columbia, follow me on X at Daniel Suhr. I think very practically, we're still in the early stages of this case. One of the things that we're having some difficulty with is just the reality of the fact that these can be somewhat shadowy organizations, I think, for lack of a better term. That National Students for Justice in Palestine doesn't exactly have an office where you can just show up and drop off your lawsuit. These organizations structure themselves, I think, intentionally to be uh, really hard to hold accountable in law. They don't have registered agents. They don't have offices. They don't have corporate documents necessarily. And so that's been the first stage of this case, is just making sure all of the defendants are appropriately and properly before the court. One of the other issues that we're working through here in the early stages, our clients have asked to proceed anonymously. My students are very concerned about their personal safety. They are very concerned about retaliation. We have seen so many instances over the course of the past 6 months of Jewish individuals being targeted because of their faith. We've seen vandalism directed at certain Colombia administrators who were among those who did do something about what was happening. So my students are very concerned about being bullied, being harassed, being vandalized, being beat up, and so or worse. So that is also happening early in this case. And then the final thing I'll say that's very much on all of our minds as we look to the near future is the anniversary of October 7th. That we are now, as you and I are recording this podcast, just a few weeks from the anniversary of October 7th. And we're all, curious is probably not the right word, anxious maybe, about what's going to happen on campuses. This fall, we've not seen the same level of activism at Columbia or elsewhere that we saw in the spring. I thought it was really interesting on the day that Columbia returned. There was a small protest of students and non-students. It was held off campus on public sidewalks, and it was generally, I think, reported as being pretty mild. Maybe in a couple instances it was a little more aggressive, but by and large, it was a small group of students who were on a sidewalk, and that was it. And so all of us are anxious to see on October 7th, do we have an explosion of campus activism? Do we have another set of illegal acts where people are taking over buildings or setting up tents or vandalizing university property or rioting, right? Like, we just don't know what to expect. But certainly for myself and a number of other lawyers who are actively attentive to protecting the rights of Jewish students on campus, I know we are all vigilant for it. And I expect that university administrators are feeling the heat. That university administrators know that they have responsibilities under Title VI to create safe and supportive learning environments, and that they need to act fast and firmly before anything gets out of hand if we see another explosion of illegal behavior.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, and we will be praying just for the success of this suit, because as you mentioned, it's not just justice for these students, but it's also a form of deterrence for future violence and illegal activity on college campuses. So thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, Dominique, it's been a total pleasure. I'm so grateful for the work of the Philos Project and just encouraging and informing, Christians across the country about the importance of standing with our Jewish brothers and sisters and standing with Israel. I'll say it's actually kind of been an interesting experience for me. I sometimes joke about, being the Gentile lawyer at the Jewish anti-Semitism party. Like, there are, just very real I think sentiments that it's important actually to show that anti-Semitism on campus doesn't just affect Jewish students. That these protests on campus don't just affect Jewish students. That all of us have a responsibility to, I think, stand for what is true and good and right. And in this moment, that means standing with Israel and standing with our Jewish brothers and sisters. But it also means telling the story of how this activism is impacting non-Jewish students in an equally damaging way, maybe not equally damaging, in a damaging way, and that all students deserve safe, supportive, legal, and safe and supportive campus environments. So I'm just really grateful. I'm grateful to be on the podcast and grateful for the advocacy you guys do. It's important and it's making a difference.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode and understanding the legal implication of the college encampments that we saw across America in the spring of 2024, and with anticipation as we look to any potential flashpoints on American universities with October 7th coming up. If you would like to learn more about Israel and Palestine, the conflict, the region, and the implications for that here in the United States, I encourage you to check out our Pathfinder courses. They are crash courses on salient topics, again, from US foreign policy to the Israel Palestinian conflict. If you wish to understand the Arab world, we have an introduction to Islam as well. All of our educational offerings here at the Fearless Project are completely free. And because of that, we do encourage you, if you feel so led, to donate to the Fearless Project if you have benefited or been blessed by our offerings. There will be a link to donate in the description box below. Like always, thank you for listening. I encourage you to subscribe to the Fearless Project so you can get updates whenever we post educational content. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week.